At the warehouse, one of the captors stepped into the room where Emma was being held. He was younger than the others, his movements hesitant as he set a bottle of water down in front of her. "Don't try anything," he muttered, avoiding her gaze. Emma noticed the small tremor in his hand. He was scared, not of her, but of whoever was in charge. She decided to test the waters. "You don't have to do this," she said softly. He froze, glancing nervously toward the door before quickly walking out. Outside, Jack parked a block away, stepping into the shadows to assess the area. He noticed subtle signs of security, guards stationed at entrances, poorly hidden cameras, but he dealt with worse. As he moved closer, he caught sight of something that made his stomach tighten. A symbol spray-painted on the building, a logo tied to a criminal syndicate he thought he'd buried years ago. This wasn't just about Emma. This was personal. Jack crouched in the shadows, his breathing steady, his senses sharp. The symbol on the warehouse wall brought back memories he'd buried deep. Missions gone wrong. Enemies he thought were long gone. If this syndicate was involved, then Emma wasn't just a random target. They wanted to send him a message, but they underestimated him. They always did. Inside, Emma worked quietly to loosen the zip ties around her wrists, inching the sharp edge of the nail she'd found against the plastic. Her heart raced with every scrape, terrified that one of the guards would hear her. The man who had brought her water hadn't returned, and she couldn't tell if that was a good or bad sign. She just knew she had to act fast. The muffled voices outside the room were growing louder. Something was happening. In a small control room overlooking the warehouse, two men monitored the live feed from their security cameras. One of them leaned closer to the screen. "Who is that?" he asked, pointing to a shadowy figure moving near the perimeter. "No one's supposed to be out there." The other man grabbed a radio. "Check the north side, now." Jack watched as one of the guards stepped out, scanning the area with a flashlight. He waited until the man turned his back before striking, swift and silent. Dragging the unconscious body into the shadows, he took the guard's radio and earpiece, slipping them on. Static filled his ears before a voice came through. "North side clear. No sign of movement." Jack smirked, his voice calm as he replied, "Copy that." Emma had finally loosened the ties around her wrists when the door creaked open. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. One of the men stepped inside, his eyes narrowing when he saw her hands. "What are you?" he started, but before he could finish, a deafening sound echoed through the warehouse, a carefully placed explosive set off by Jack to create chaos. The lights flickered, and shouts erupted as the building plunged into confusion. Emma seized the moment, grabbing the nail and slashing at the man's arm, bolting toward the door as he stumbled back. Outside, Jack moved with precision, using the chaos to his advantage. He was getting closer, but so were they. Emma sprinted through the dimly lit corridors of the warehouse, her pulse pounding like a drum. The shouts of her captors echoed behind her, their footsteps closing in. She didn't know where she was going, she just knew she had to keep moving. The flickering lights cast erratic shadows on the walls, making every corner feel like a trap. But then she saw it, a faint glow from an exit sign at the end of the hall. Freedom felt just within reach. Jack, meanwhile, was cutting through the chaos like a force of nature. Every movement was calculated, every step deliberate. He had taken out 2 more guards and was now inside the warehouse, navigating the maze of crates and machinery. The radio in his ear crackled with frantic voices. "She's heading toward the east exit." One of them barked. Jack's grip on his weapon tightened. East exit, he was close. Emma burst through the exit door, gasping for air as she stumbled into the night. But instead of finding open space, she froze. A sleek black car was parked just outside, its engine idling. A man stood by the driver's side, his silhouette sharp and imposing under the dim glow of a street lamp. This wasn't one of the men who had taken her. He was different, calm, composed, dangerous. The night was calm, the kind of stillness that makes you feel like nothing bad could ever happen. But in a dimly lit alley, shadows moved with a purpose. A black SUV rolled up, tires crunching against the gravel. Inside, the mafia crew exchanged silent nods. They had their orders: find the girl, make her disappear. To them, it was just another job, another payday. What they didn't know was that this was no ordinary girl. Emma, an independent and spirited college student, had just finished a late-night study session with friends. As she walked home, her headphones in, she didn't notice the dark figures trailing her. She had no idea her life was about to take a terrifying turn. The men grabbed her, quick and calculated, muffling her screams and dragging her into the SUV. In their minds, she was just leverage, a pawn in their endless games of power and intimidation. But Emma wasn't just anyone. She was the daughter of a man whose name alone struck fear into the hearts of the most dangerous criminals. Her father, Colonel Jack "Ghost" Morgan, was no stranger to violence. A decorated Marine with a reputation for being the most lethal force the U.S. Navy had ever seen, Jack had spent years dismantling entire terrorist networks overseas. What made him truly terrifying wasn't just his skills, it was his relentless drive when it came to protecting those he loved. Back at home, Jack was sipping his morning coffee when his phone buzzed. A chilling video message appeared. Emma, bound and frightened, her captors' faces masked, their voices distorted as they demanded a hefty ransom. Jack's hand trembled, not with fear, but with fury. The mafia had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They had no idea they'd just declared war on the deadliest man alive. And Jack, he was already planning how to bring every one of them down. Jack stared at the video on his phone, his jaw clenched so tightly it felt like it might snap. He replayed it, studying every detail: the faint echo of voices in the background, the flickering light overhead, the shadow of a man's hand gripping Emma's shoulder. He knew she was trying to stay strong, but the fear in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. These men were dangerous, but they had no clue who they were messing with. Jack wasn't just a Marine, he was a strategist. He'd spent years learning how to think 10 steps ahead of his enemies. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to use leverage against him, but it would be the last time anyone made the mistake of targeting his family. He grabbed his laptop and logged into a private military-grade system. Within minutes, he had the video analyzed, tracing the IP address to a city 2 hours away. It was a lead, but not enough. Meanwhile, in a rundown warehouse, Emma sat on a cold metal chair, her wrists bound tightly with zip ties. She tried to steady her breathing, replaying the self-defense lessons her dad had drilled into her when she was younger. Stay calm, observe everything, look for a way out. The men hadn't spoken to her much, but she could tell by their nervous energy that they weren't seasoned criminals. They were amateurs, pawns in a larger game. But who was pulling the strings? And why her? As Jack pieced together clues, his mind raced with questions. Was this a random act, or had someone deliberately chosen his daughter, knowing who he was? If they knew his history, they would have known better than to provoke him. That meant one thing: they didn't know. Jack's phone buzzed again, a text from an unknown number. Coordinates. No message, just numbers. A trap, he thought, but it didn't matter. He was going, and whoever was waiting for him had no idea the storm that was coming. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she sat in silence, listening to the faint sounds of the men arguing in the next room. Their voices were muffled, but she could pick up fragments. This wasn't part of the deal, one of them said, his tone tense. You think the boss cares? We do what we're told, another snapped. Emma leaned slightly forward, her eyes scanning the room for anything she could use. A loose nail on the floor caught her attention, and she made a mental note to inch closer when she got the chance. If her dad had taught her anything, it was that survival came down to small opportunities, and she wasn't giving up without a fight. Jack, meanwhile, was driving toward the coordinates with laser focus, his mind running through every possible scenario. The car was silent except for the faint buzz of a secure earpiece he'd connected to a former Marine buddy, Nick. Jack wasn't about to walk into this blind. The coordinates lead to an abandoned industrial area. Nick's voice came through. But I'm picking up chatter on a private frequency. Someone's expecting company. Jack smirked grimly. Good, let them. The bustling market was alive with the sound of chatter, the aroma of fresh produce, and the hum of engines. It was the kind of place where locals gathered, a mix of farmers, artisans, and weekend shoppers. Among them stood a man who instantly caught the eye of anyone passing by. Towering over the crowd, his broad shoulders and quiet demeanor gave off a sense of calm strength. Clad in a simple flannel shirt and jeans, he looked like your average farmer, though something about him seemed different. Little did anyone know, this farmer carried a past more extraordinary than anyone could imagine. Enter a group of bikers, loud and cocky, rolling into the market as if they owned the place. They weren't there for the fresh veggies or handmade crafts. Instead, they seemed to thrive on causing a scene, revving their engines, shouting, and drawing attention wherever they went. Spotting the towering farmer by his stall, they zeroed in on him, mistaking his quiet nature for weakness. "Hey, big guy," one of them sneered, leaning against the farmer's truck. "What's a giant like you doing selling carrots? Shouldn't you be out wrestling bears or something?" The group erupted in laughter, egging each other on as they inched closer, testing his patience. The farmer didn't flinch. He simply looked at them, his expression unreadable. The crowd began to murmur, some stepping back, sensing the brewing tension. The bikers pushed further, their antics growing bolder. What they didn't realize was that this man wasn't just any farmer. Beneath the rugged exterior was a retired Delta Force commander, one of the most elite warriors in the world. The air grew thick as the bikers continued to provoke him, but the farmer stayed still, his calm masking decades of training and experience. The question wasn't if he could handle them, it was how far he'd let this go. And then, with a subtle shift in his stance, everything began to change. The farmer's silence only fueled the bikers' arrogance. They mistook his calm demeanor for fear, a fatal miscalculation. One of them stepped closer, flipping over a crate of produce with a smirk. "What's wrong?" "Cat got your tongue, big guy," he taunted, his friends roaring with laughter. The crowd, now uneasy, exchanged worried glances but kept their distance. No one wanted to get involved, but whispers rippled through the market about whether the man would finally snap. But the farmer didn't. Instead, he bent down slowly, picking up the scattered vegetables without a word. His deliberate movements seemed to irritate the bikers more than if he had shouted back. Another one kicked over a bucket of fresh apples, sending them rolling across the ground. The leader of the group chuckled and folded his arms. "Guess who's not much of a talker." Makes sense, probably not much of a fighter either. What they couldn't see, what no one in that market knew, was the storm brewing beneath the surface. This wasn't the first time this man had faced a challenge. His past was filled with moments far more intense than a group of unruly bikers looking to cause trouble. Years of covert missions, life and death situations, and relentless training had forged him into someone who didn't act on impulse but waited for the right moment. As the bikers continued to jeer, a few brave marketgoers tried to intervene. "Come on, guys, leave him alone," an older man said, stepping forward. But the bikers shrugged him off, their focus remaining on the towering figure who hadn't even raised his voice. The farmer finally straightened up, brushing dirt off his hands. His eyes, though calm, now carried a sharpness that hadn't been there before. He glanced at the bikers, almost as if he was sizing them up, calculating. And for the first time, he spoke. "Are you done?" His voice was low and steady, but it carried an edge that made even the bystanders take notice. The bikers laughed, but there was a hesitation this time, a flicker of doubt. Something told them this wasn't going to play out the way they expected. The leader of the bikers stepped forward, smirking as if he'd just been challenged. "Are we done?" he repeated mockingly, cracking his knuckles. "Not even close. You're gonna do something about it, old man." His crew rolled with approval, emboldened by their numbers. They spread out slightly, as if trying to corner the farmer, their leather jackets glinting under the midday sun. As the sheriff approached, Tom gave him a knowing nod. "Thanks for stepping in," the sheriff said, "but I had a feeling you wouldn't need my help." Tom chuckled softly. "It's just another day, Sheriff. Sometimes, people just need a little reminder to choose the right path." And as the market returned to its usual bustle, no one could quite shake the memory of the quiet farmer who had shown them that true strength isn't about picking fights. It's about knowing when to stand your ground and when to let go. As the dust settled, the market slowly came back to life. Vendors returned to their stalls, rearranging their goods, and shoppers began to murmur about what they had just witnessed. Some stayed to help Tom gather the scattered produce, their earlier fear replaced with admiration. Others spoke in hushed tones, trading stories they'd heard about Delta Force, wondering what other secrets this quiet farmer might be carrying. The sheriff lingered for a moment, watching Tom as he finished cleaning up. "You know," he said, his voice low enough so only Tom could hear, "you might want to share a little more of your story with folks around here. Might save you some trouble next time." Tom shook his head, smiling faintly. "That's not why I'm here, Sheriff. I didn't come to this town to be anyone's hero, just trying to live a simple life." The sheriff chuckled and tipped his hat. "Fair enough. But for what it's worth, you've earned yourself a lot of respect today." As the sheriff walked away, Tom took a moment to lean against his truck, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He glanced at the young boy who had been hiding earlier, now standing nearby with wide eyes. The boy hesitated, then stepped forward. "Mister," he said shyly, "are you a real hero?" Tom knelt down to the boy's level, his rugged face softening. "No, kid," he said gently. "I'm just a guy who knows when to stand up for what's right. That's something anyone can do." The boy nodded, looking inspired as he ran back to his mother, who smiled gratefully at Tom. By the time the sun began to dip below the horizon, the market was back to normal. But for those who had been